The moment my brother sent that text, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, still in my robe, still half asleep. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up expecting something ordinary, a meme, a reminder about Mom's birthday, maybe a weather complaint. Instead, I read 6 words that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. Natalie doesn't want you in the wedding. I set my mug down. I read it again. Then I put my phone face down on the counter, finished making my coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I didn't type out the long, careful response I could feel forming somewhere in my chest. I just sat there and I thought about the $47,000. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at a logistics company in Cincinnati, which means I spend my days building spreadsheets that tell other people exactly how much things cost and exactly what they can afford. I am good at my job. I am precise. I notice numbers the way some people notice faces, instinctively, without effort, without having to try. I have one brother. His name is Daniel. He is 26, which means there are 5 years between us, and for most of our lives, those 5 years felt like a gap I was always trying to close on his behalf. When he was struggling in high school, I tutored him over the phone from my college dorm. When he was deciding between 2 universities, I built him a spreadsheet. Ironic, I know, comparing tuition costs, average starting salaries by major, loan repayment timelines. When he got into the better school and the financial aid fell short, I told him not to worry about it. I told him I would handle it. That was the first $31,000. I want to be clear about something. I did not loan my brother that money. I gave it to him. I gave it to him the way you give someone a life vest when they're drowning. Not because you're keeping a tally, not because you expect to be repaid, but because you love them and you have the means, and the alternative is watching them sink. I didn't sit across from him at a table and sign paperwork. I didn't charge interest. I transferred money from my savings account into his semester by semester, and I told him the only thing I wanted in return was for him to graduate and build something good with his life. He graduated. He moved to Nashville. He got a job at a marketing agency and started dating a woman named Natalie, whom he met at a rooftop bar and proposed to 11 months later. I heard about the proposal from my mother, who heard about it from Daniel's Instagram story, which I had missed because I was in a work meeting. That was a small thing. I filed it away. When Daniel finally called me 2 days after the proposal, he was breathless and happy in the way people are when they've done something they're proud of. I told him congratulations. I meant it. I asked about the ring, about the timeline, about whether he picked a venue yet. He said they were thinking about a vineyard outside Nashville, something intimate, maybe 100 guests, late September the following year. He said it casually, the way you describe a daydream. And then, after a pause, he said, I don't know how we're going to afford it, honestly. Natalie has a vision, but we're both still paying off our cars. I heard what he wasn't saying. I should have let that silence sit. I should have offered something small, a toast at the rehearsal dinner, a contribution toward the honeymoon. Instead, I said the thing I always said, the thing that had become so automatic it barely felt like a decision anymore. I said, don't stress about it, let me help. That was the second $16,000. I covered the venue deposit. I covered the catering down payment. I covered the photographer because Natalie had a specific photographer she wanted, a woman who shot for a bridal magazine and whose prices reflected that. I sent money in installments, the way I always did, quietly and without ceremony. I didn't attend the venue walkthrough or the catering tasting. I wasn't invited to either. I told myself that made sense. I lived in Cincinnati, they were in Nashville, the logistics were complicated. I told myself that was fine. Looking back, I was already practicing the very particular skill of talking myself out of things that bothered me. Daniel's fiancé and I had met 3 times total before the engagement, a birthday dinner in Nashville the previous spring, a weekend visit the summer before that, a brief, slightly awkward lunch when they passed through Cincinnati on a road trip. Each time, Natalie was polite in the way that people are polite when they haven't decided how much they like you yet. She asked me questions about my job with an expression that I couldn't quite read. Not bored, exactly, but not engaged either. She and Daniel had a shorthand that left little room for anyone else. I told myself that was normal. New couples build a world together. I was an outsider looking in. That was fine. What I didn't realize, or maybe what I refused to realize, was that in Natalie's mind I had already been categorized. I just didn't know which category yet. I found out in February, 7 months before the wedding. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual because we usually talked on Sundays. She said she had something to tell me and that she hoped I wouldn't be upset. I sat up straighter without meaning to. She told me that the bridesmaids had been chosen, Natalie's 2 sisters and her best friend from college, and that Natalie had decided she wanted to keep the bridal party small and cohesive, and that Daniel completely supported her decision and that they both hoped I would understand. I asked my mother if Daniel had planned to call me himself. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought so, yes, probably soon. He texted me instead. 6 days later. 6 words. Natalie doesn't want you in the wedding. No explanation. No apology. No phone call following up to make sure I was okay. Just that sentence, sitting in a blue bubble on my screen like it was a scheduling update. I put my phone face down on the counter. I finished my coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about the $47,000, and I thought about 4 years of being the person in this family who always said, "Don't worry about it," and I thought about being told, by text, by my younger brother, that his fiancée didn't want me standing beside him on the most important day of his life. And then I thought about something a therapist had said to me once, years ago, during a particularly difficult stretch. She had said, "The people who take the most from us are rarely the ones who appreciate it. They've simply learned that you'll keep giving." I picked up my phone. I typed 2 words, "Understood." Okay, I sent it. Then I opened my banking app. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage. It wasn't even hurt exactly. Or it was, but the hurt was underneath something else, something quieter and more deliberate. What I felt was a kind of clarity, the specific, clean sensation of a decision making itself. I looked at the automatic transfer I had set up 8 months earlier. $2,000 a month, transferred from my account to Daniel's on the 1st of every month, earmarked for wedding expenses as I had labeled it in my notes. I had sent 6 payments. I had 3 more scheduled before the wedding. I canceled all 3. Then I looked at the $6,000 still outstanding on the photographer's contract, which I had agreed to cover in full. I pulled up the email chain with the photographer, a warm and professional woman named Simone, and I wrote her a careful, polite message explaining that there had been a change in the financial arrangements and that going forward, payment for the remaining balance would need to come directly from the couple. I copied Daniel on the email. I didn't say anything else. I didn't explain. I didn't write the long, careful message I could feel forming in my chest. I simply stopped. 3 hours later, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 20 minutes after that. I let it go to voicemail again. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't punishing him. I was sitting on my couch with a glass of wine and a book I wasn't really reading, and I genuinely needed a few more hours before I could have that conversation without saying something I couldn't take back. I have learned, slowly and at considerable personal cost, that the conversations you have before you're ready are almost never the right ones. He texted at 10 o'clock that night. The message was longer this time. "Claire, I saw the email. Can you please call me? I don't know what's happening. Natalie is upset. Can we just talk about this?" I noticed he didn't say he was upset. He said Natalie was upset. I noticed that and I filed it away and I went to bed. I called him the next morning, a Saturday at 9 a.m. He answered on the first ring. He sounded different from the last time we'd spoken. Less certain, less easy. He started talking before I could say hello, a rush of words that amounted to, Simone had reached out about the balance, Natalie was blindsided, they were confused about what I was doing, and could I please just explain what was going on? I let him finish. Then I said, very calmly, I canceled the remaining payments and forwarded the outstanding balance to you because I'm no longer contributing to the wedding. I should have communicated that directly instead of through Simone's email. That was poor judgment on my part, and I'm sorry for the confusion it caused. Silence. Then, what? Why? And here's the thing about that question. Here's the thing about being asked why, by someone who genuinely doesn't understand, or who does understand, but is hoping you'll offer them a softer version of the truth. I had two choices in that moment. I could soften it. I could say something about needing to reassess my finances, or about feeling stretched thin, or about some vague and invented circumstance that let everyone save face. I had spent years choosing that option. I said, because I found out through a text message that I'm not welcome in your wedding. And I think, if you look at the situation honestly, you'll understand why I've made this decision. Another silence. Longer this time? It's not that you're not welcome, he said finally. It's just, Natalie wanted it a certain way. She's close with her sisters and her best friend, and she wanted it to feel cohesive. Daniel, I said. I understand. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm just explaining my decision. But the money was a gift, I said, and I gave it freely. But I'm not in a position to continue contributing to something that I'm not really a part of. That seems fair to me. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then he said, Mom is going to be upset. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have handled this differently. Not I understand why you feel this way. Just, Mom is going to be upset. I said, I know, I hope you'll be the one to tell her. My mother called that afternoon. She called in the way that mothers call when they've been told a partial version of a story and have already decided how they feel about it. Her voice had that particular tight quality that I had learned, over 31 years, meant she was working very hard to stay reasonable. She said she'd spoken to Daniel. She said she understood I was hurt. She said she wished I had talked to her before I'd made any decisions, and that she thought I was being punitive, and that weddings were stressful and these things happened, and did I really think this was the right way to handle it? I let her finish. Then I said, Mom, I've contributed $47,000 to Daniel's education and his wedding. I found out I wasn't included in the wedding party through a 6-word text message. I think my response has been extremely measured. Quiet. $47,000, she repeated. Yes, more quiet. Here's the thing I understood, in that silence, that I don't think my mother had ever fully computed before. She had known, in general terms, that I helped Daniel. She had known I contributed, but the number, the actual, specific, irreducible number, had never been spoken out loud in our family. It had lived in my bank statements and in Daniel's grateful texts, and in the comfortable, unspoken arrangement we had all settled into, where I gave and Daniel received, and nobody examined it too closely, because examining it closely would have required everyone to have a reaction. I didn't know it was that much, she said. I know, I said. I didn't say it with bitterness. I genuinely didn't feel bitter in that moment. I felt something closer to tired, the specific exhaustion of having carried something heavy for a long time without telling anyone how heavy it was. My mother was quiet for another long moment. Then she said very carefully, I think Daniel and Natalie owe you an apology. It was not a grand statement. It was not a turning point in a movie. It was a small, careful sentence from a woman who was rearranging things in her head in real time, trying to figure out where she'd been standing and whether she'd been standing in the right place. I said, I think so too. The apology came 12 days later. It came from Daniel in a phone call that lasted 40 minutes, and it was, I want to be honest about this, genuinely good. Not perfect. There were moments where I could hear him reaching for the version of the conversation that would return things to normal. Fastest. The version where I accepted his apology and agreed to keep contributing, and everyone moved forward without too much discomfort. But there were also moments that felt real. He said he had taken me for granted. He said the text was inexcusable. He said he had been so caught up in making Natalie happy that he had stopped asking himself whether he was being a good brother, and that he was ashamed of that. I believed him. I believe most people when they apologize, not because I'm naive, but because I've learned that the alternative, spending your life waiting for people to mean it before you'll accept it, is its own kind of prison. I told him I accepted his apology. I told him I loved him. I told him I would be at the wedding, as a guest, and that I was happy to be there. I did not recontribute financially. That was not part of the reconciliation, and he did not ask me to, which told me that somewhere in those 12 days, he had finally started to understand the difference between an apology and a transaction. The wedding was in September. It was at the vineyard they'd chosen, golden and warm in the late afternoon light, the kind of day that looks like it was designed to be photographed. I sat in the third row on the groom's side, in a green dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and I watched my brother stand at the end of an aisle lined with white flowers and wait for his bride. He looked nervous and young and happier than I had ever seen him, and despite everything, despite the text message and the $47,000 and the 12 days and the 40-minute phone call, I felt something loosen in my chest when he saw Natalie walking toward him and his whole face changed. I thought, I love him. That was always true. It was never not true. I also thought, I will never let this happen again. Not as a threat, not as a vow made in anger, just as a quiet, clear-eyed acknowledgement of something I had finally stopped pretending wasn't real. Loving someone is not the same as funding them. Being generous is not the same as being available without limit. You can love your family completely and still decide what you will and will not do for them. These things are not in conflict. They never were. Natalie and I are not close. I don't think we'll ever be particularly close, and I've made my peace with that. She is polite to me at holidays. I am polite to her. We occupy the same family events with a particular cordial distance of two people who have seen something true about each other and have mutually decided not to dwell on it. My brother and I talk every 2 or 3 weeks now. The calls are easier than they used to be. Lighter somehow, as if removing the financial undercurrent has made room for something more like an actual relationship. He asked my advice last spring about a job change. I asked his opinion about an apartment I was considering. These are small things. They are also not small things at all. My mother said something to me at Christmas after 2 glasses of wine that I've thought about many times since. She said, I think we leaned on you in ways we should have been ashamed of. And I think we told ourselves it was okay because you never said it wasn't. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just squeezed her hand and told her it was okay, which is maybe what I always do, which is maybe something I'm still working on. But here's what I know now, sitting in my kitchen in Cincinnati on an ordinary morning, coffee going, sunlight moving across the floor. I know what I'm worth. Not in dollars. Not in the specific, uncomfortable sum of $47,000 that my mother repeated back to me in a shocked voice on a Saturday afternoon. I mean worth in the fuller sense, the sense that includes what I deserve and what I'm willing to accept, and where I end and other people begin. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I wouldn't trade that knowledge for anything. Not for an invitation, not for a place in a bridal party, not even, if I'm being fully honest, for the $47,000. What I paid for in the end was clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is worth every penny. If you've ever been the person in your family who always said don't worry about it, the one who covered things quietly, who made problems disappear, who convinced yourself that keeping the peace was the same as being loved, I want you to hear this. It's not weakness to stop. It's not cruelty to have a limit. The people who love you back, genuinely, will still be there after you stop funding them. And the ones who disappear when the money does, they were never really there. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been taken for granted by someone you would have done anything for? And what did it take for you to finally stop?